Hello again. So this is the second installment of the preparation for the prose passage essay that you'll be writing for the AP Lit exam on May 13th. In this segment, I want to go over the rubric that will be used to evaluate your essay, and then I want to go over a high-scoring student sample of the essay from the passage we just discussed, the Thomas Hardy, Mayor of Casterbridge passage and prompt. So first of all, let's just review the rubric. For the prose fiction analysis, you can earn a total of 6 points for this particular essay. The first point you must earn is the thesis point. Now, the thesis point is you respond to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the passage. I think it's important that you put this thesis statement in your introductory paragraph. And in the case of responding to the prompt, your thesis will contain 2 to 3 particular literary devices. Either they've been spelled out in the prompt itself or that you just know and have at your disposal, and then answers the part of the prompt that they're asking, which is the complex, specifically the complex relationship between the characters. So let's all get that thesis point. Then the next category or scoring criteria on the rubric is upwards. It goes from 0 to 4 points. Okay. I think that we've gone over this many times, but let's shoot for the 3 to 4 points. And this is a combination of providing evidence, and that's not only contextualizing an example, but also providing textual evidence, quoting from the passage, and providing commentary on how that evidence supports the complex relationship between the characters. Okay? You do that well, and that's the gist of your body paragraphs, you can gain 3 or even 4 points, depending on how nuanced and thoughtful and clear you make the connection between the device or the technique and the complex relationship between the characters. And then the final point to earn is the sophistication point. And I've talked to you many times about this. This is where you must use nuance, sophistication of your vocabulary, college level vocabulary. Use words, precise words to characterize, to analyze. Use those really strong active analytical verbs rather than be verbs, all right? Use complete grammatical sentences. And vary your sentence length. Don't sound robotic. Don't have a string of simple sentences. You want a variety of sentence lengths and structures to provide that fluency to your writing. And this is where you can gain upwards of 1 point for sophistication. So that's the rubric. I just wanted to remind you that you'll gain upwards anywhere from 0 to 6 points. I'm really expecting all of you, based on past performances, to earn that 4 or 5 or 6 points on this essay. So let's do that. All right. So the next thing I want to do is bring up the sample, student sample on the Mayor of Casterbridge essay. Okay. Because this is an older passage, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It's based on the old rubric, so I'm not even going to discuss the scoring. Instead, I'm just going to read to you and discuss with you this student sample in response to the Thomas Hardy's Mayor of Casterbridge that we've already gone over in the previous segment. So let me read this to you. In this passage from Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, notice author, title of the work, novel, underlined. The narrator describes the relationship between the mayor, Michael Henchard, and his daughter, Elizabeth Jane, with whom he had been previously estranged. Remember, this situation is outlined in the prompt. Throughout the passage, Henchard somewhat hypocritically, and I think that's a good word because that is true, as he is uncultivated himself, sharply and repeatedly admonishes, good word, his daughter for various manifestations of her lower class tendencies. This is all contextualization of the situation and the relationship between the two characters, which is what the prompt is asking you to do. Henchard apparently seeks to improve his daughter so that she can better fit into his life as mayor. Yet, the more Elizabeth Jane attempts to appease her father, the more he seems to push her away. and this is evident at the end of the passage. So once again, this is a nice, thorough, nuanced, and well-written contextualization of what's at stake in this passage. Thus, between Henchard's verbal aggressions and his shift towards icy verbal neglect, even as Elizabeth Jane changes her behavior to please him, this passage suggests that though the father and daughter have been physically reunited, they largely remain estranged on emotional level. And so that shows the complex relationship. Any idea what the device is? Well, I think what we have here is the verbal aggressions. It's an aspect of diction, and a shift. Shifting is good. Contrasts and shifts are very good things to point out, that he shifts towards icy verbal neglect, even though she is changing her behavior. And so that's kind of a hybrid of maybe tone and selection of detail. So even though the devices aren't discreetly spelled out, they are implied, and it's done very well here. Notice there's great use of active verbs and not a lot of reliance on any be verbs to speak of. Body paragraph number 1. From the very first sentence, the passage begins to set up the relationship between Henchard and Elizabeth Jane as an unhealthy one. Once again, the emphasis is on the complex relationship between characters. This one is showing how unhealthy that relationship is. The narrator refers to Henchard's announcement of himself to Elizabeth as her father, not as a joyous occasion or a blessing, but rather as an enigma. All right, so that key word enigma is it shows that there's some confusion and ambivalence. In her newly discovered father, Elizabeth finds not support and praise, but rather coldness, another good word. So this is a diction analysis for sure, and open chiding. Lots of quotes of different words and phrases. Henchard seems constantly on the lookout for Elizabeth's grievous failings, which shows kind of that she falls short. And throughout the passage, it seems he finds many. First, he issues a sharp reprimand. I pointed that out as something that he does because he gets bossy, regarding Elizabeth's often dialect word choices. Remember, she speaks kind of lowly. Elizabeth receives her father's criticism with shame and sadness, which shows that she kind of has this meek, passive aspect to her, and eager to please, determines to change her patterns of speech. The passage includes an extensive list of words and phrases she determines to remove from her vocabulary. And those are some of the dialectical words that she chooses to remove. And so this is kind of a selection of detailed diction argument all fused into one. Next paragraph. Yet these lengths are not enough for Henchard, who moves on to criticizing his daughter's handwriting. Here's more of this criticizing. As a relatively new member of the upper class, Henchard himself is a poor tool with a pen. Nevertheless, he believed that bristling characters were as innate and separable part of refined womanhood as sex itself, saying that women should be able to write clearly, and thus expects Elizabeth to write neatly. Though Henchard's expectations for Elizabeth seem harsh, they do not come from a completely uncaring place. Henchard's preoccupation with Elizabeth's handwriting, for example, stems from his desire for her, quote, to assume the very position of refined womanhood. So he seems maybe showing that he wants her to be better, but he's not being very nice in doing so, which would allow her an entrance into his life as mayor and therefore a member of the upper strata of society. Despite Henchard's potentially innocent intentions, his attempts to alter Elizabeth to fit into his lifestyle seem to do her nothing but a disservice. I think disservice is putting it lightly. I think he pretty much defeats her. Elizabeth's considerate disposition, something we pointed out. Once again, this whole argument doesn't seem to show, like, this is paragraphs about diction, this paragraph's about selection of detail. It seems to be an interweaving of diction and selection of detail, which, because it's so well written, seems to work. It's got nuance, and it's very, very consistent in always coming back to explaining how these words and how this detail creates this complex relationship. An aspect of her personality which had undoubtedly aided her before became a pitfall to her now. And though her efforts to fulfill her father's notions of refined womanhood are relatively successful, she neither experiences personal contentment nor any additional closeness to her father. In fact, the passage concludes, and I pointed out how important that last paragraph is, on a rather ominous note by stating that the more interesting that her appearance and manners become, the more she seemed to estrange him. That's the gist of their relationship. The paradoxical impact, paradoxical means contradictory, impact Elizabeth's attempts to please her father have on her actual relationship to him emphasizes the hopelessness of her endeavor. The repetition of the phrase "the more," repetition, just kind of thrown in there, but that's all right. It's definitely part of the detail. Suggests that Elizabeth's quest for approval from her father is a quite futile one. Furthermore, the choice of the word estranged to describe her actions' impact on her relationship to her father telegraphs, great use of active verbs, by the way, a sad but key message about the relationship, that though they may live in the same house and recognize each other as family, despite their best efforts, Elizabeth and Henchard have remained quite estranged. Notice, that's the end of analysis. There's no conclusion. So, once again, if I were to say, it's a highly scored essay. I think it contains great, insightful analysis. It pretty much combines diction, selection of detail, as ways to help develop that complex relationship. But there's no real distinct, this paragraph's about diction, this one's about selection of detail. It's just kind of interwoven. I don't know if I'd recommend that approach. I think it's good to maybe have a diction tone paragraph and then a selection of detail paragraph, but it's up to you if you feel like you can weave them and combine them in such a nuanced way as this one does. Great. So that leads me to kind of wanting to go over with the remaining time I have, kind of this basic AP Lit Prose essay outline and checklist. This is something that I will have posted on Schoology for you. You may use it on the day of the exam. A few things to remember. You'll have 45 minutes to read the prompt and the passage, plan, and then write your essay. So you have to be moving along. The focus of the prompt will most likely be characterization, namely the complex relationship between two characters. Just plan on that. The prompt will provide important information about the situation of the passage, so use that information to your advantage. Use it to help situate and contextualize. Your essay will consist of an introductory paragraph, 2 to 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion only if you have time. And you see this high-scoring sample I just spoke of doesn't have a conclusion. Oftentimes, the prompt recommends certain literary devices to focus on. Obviously, this recommendation can be helpful, and you may focus on one or more of these, but you are not obligated or limited to discuss only these recommended devices. Here are some of the devices that you could and probably should explore when writing your prose essay, ranging from word choice to tone to selection of detail to dialogue to point of view to irony. I would use definitely 2 to 3 of those. Remember, the word choice or diction combined with tone can be a very robust body paragraph for sure. But once again, you're always, whichever devices you choose, you must convincingly not only have examples with textual evidence, but also you must convincingly and in a sophisticated, nuanced way show how that device contributes and aids in the development of the complex relationship between the characters. The basic outline is this. We've talked about this before, but you've got your intro paragraph that contextualizes the situation and the character dynamic. And you have a clearly stated thesis statement. Your body paragraphs consist of 2 or more properly contextualized examples with textual evidence, and that you make that very, very important, clear and insightful and nuanced analysis of how these examples illustrate the complex relationship between characters. Conclusion, if you get to it, 1 or 2 sentences just to indicate that your essay has reached its conclusion. And then remember, we want to earn that sophistication point. So use active verbs of analysis and limit your be verbs. If you look at that sample, there's great active verbs, very few be verbs. Use college-level vocabulary and precise words to characterize and analyze. Always write in complete grammatical sentences, and be sure to vary your sentence length and structure. You don't want to sound robotic or formulaic. You want to sound natural and fluent. So I hope that all helps. We will touch base and Zoom a few more times before the exam, but we're getting there, folks. Hang in there. Be well, stay well, and we'll talk soon.